I'm going to be talking about the program evaluation I did for RISD's Advocate for Inclusion in Residence initiative. So first of all, I worked with RISD's Residence Life office, and my supervisor was Dan Murphy, who's right there, but also my other supervisors here, Benjamin. And I work at RISD as a resident director for the Hill Houses and Apartments area, but specifically for this project, I was working around curriculum development and evaluation. So this is sort of just an overview of how the presentation is going to go and all that I'll be discussing. So about the RLO, that's how I will refer to the office throughout this presentation. So they really emphasize knowledge of and care for self, active community engagement, and social justice for students to encourage student growth over time and the development of responsible critical makers. So the Residence Life office works with students to build safe and inclusive residential communities with the help of undergraduate student staff members. So the AIR position, they're undergraduate student staff members who live in the residence halls and work alongside resident advisors, or RAs. So the AIRs are meant to serve as advocates for marginalized students, develop active and passive programming, plan social justice training for RAs, meet individually with students who may be facing identity-based stress or discrimination, follow up on bias incidents through a restorative justice approach, and just generally provide suggestions to the RLO on how to be more inclusive. So specifically, when I started this project, I was interested in a few questions. So namely, what issues are minority students at RISD facing? Is the program effective in addressing these issues? What are the program's strengths and weaknesses? And how does the program compare to analogous programs at other higher ed institutions nationally? So ultimately, I want to evaluate the program's impact on residential communities since its inception in 2016 and assess the program's effectiveness in achieving its stated outcomes. So I conducted the evaluation primarily using qualitative research methods like a literature review, document analysis, a survey, and interviews. And all of this will ultimately culminate in a final report that I will deliver to the RLO with housing policy recommendations. So to talk more specifically about what I did, I completed interviews with RISD Student Affairs and CAP professionals, that's the counseling center, and they all have close ties to the program. I interviewed the program founder, who was a former employee of the RLO. I interviewed the AIRs themselves, so those are the student staff members, and student activists to get a sense of the campus climate and culture. I also interviewed representatives from higher ed institutions with similar programs, and I created and disseminated a survey campus-wide to assess student perceptions and interactions with the AIRs and with the AIR program. So I think this is an important campus context to talk about. Not Your Token was a multi-stage student protest that spanned from 2015 to 2016. It was spearheaded by a student group called BAD, Black Artists and Designers. And some of the demands that they were asking for were a mandatory global consciousness course, more faculty of color, more visiting artists of color, and just generally better supports for low-income students and minority students. And so the AIR program was really born out of this kind of campus environment. So it's something I have to include in my analysis. So when I was conducting the literature review, I found that a curriculum that exposes students to information about race and ethnicity, as well as informal interactions with diverse peers, fosters a learning environment characterized by active thinking and intellectual engagement. But both frequency and quality of these experiences matter, so neither a sheer number of just diverse bodies nor a culturally relevant curriculum are sufficient alone to create meaningful learning experiences that will have a lasting impact on students. And then lastly, providing students with access to racial experts and mentors, as well as campus programming that involves active discussions of race together can help create an anti-racist college environment. So regarding residential education, I found that students who live on campus in residence halls learn more and are more likely to persist in college through college than those who do not live in the residence halls and who commute to college. The heterogeneous social environment of a residence hall facilitates personal growth and development for students. And the process for designing intentional, effective hall programming should involve identifying specific learning goals, specifying strategic learning objectives, planning educational activities, creating program lesson plans, and assessing learning outcomes. So this is just a neat graphic that I found that really outlines the goals, objectives, and the approaches for effective residential education and the people who are necessary to carry it out and make it successful. So I did a cross-site comparison. This was the benchmarking that I mentioned. So I decided to compare the AIR program to the University of Michigan's Diversity Peer Educator program and Brown's Minority Peer Counselor program. So what I found was very interesting. What I found was that the DPE and the MPC programs are much older, first of all, and they also have a lot more student staff members doing this kind of work, doing diversity work. So just to highlight the unique features of each of these programs, the MPC program has an MPCC role built in, so that's a Minority Peer Counselor Coordinator. So these are juniors and seniors who have been MPCs before, who essentially serve as peer mentors to the MPCs to ensure that they're fully prepared to do the job and to help them through the role. Additionally, the MPC program is actually a joint collaboration between two offices. So it's housed under the Office of Residence Life and also the Brown Center for Students of Color. And they each have separate responsibilities regarding supervision of the MPCs. Regarding the DPE program, they have multicultural councils in each residential community at the University of Michigan. So a multicultural council is a group of students that plan community-wide events centered around diversity, and the DPE advises the multicultural council in their particular residential community. So they're working in tandem with other students to do diversity work. Additionally, each residential community at the University of Michigan has a multicultural lounge, which is sort of a gallery space that highlights activism throughout history at the university. And in my mind, it's like an automatic programming space. So it's a dialogue space set up for conversations about identity. And it's in each residential area, which is pretty remarkable. At RISD, there are only 3 airs. So there are 3 residential areas at RISD. It's the Hill Houses, which is where I work, 15 West, and then the first year area. So there's 1 air for each community. And for context, my area, the Hill Houses, has about 400 students. So there's 1 air for all those students. Regarding the interviews that I conducted, I saw some trends in the responses, so I just want to highlight those. So I found that people viewed the AIR role as more reactive rather than proactive. The expectations were somewhat unclear on what the role and responsibilities entailed. There are not enough airs, and so therefore there's a lot of responsibility put on each one. The job is very emotionally laborious, which sort of comes with the work itself. Also, each of the airs is someone who holds a marginalized identity themselves, so it really strikes a personal note, so it makes sense that it would be emotionally difficult. Additionally, there's insufficient pro-staff support and expertise. The airs don't receive enough training. And despite the existence of the role, RAs still aren't engaging in diverse programming in their residential halls with any regularity, I suppose. And this might be because there's a lack of AIR involvement in RA training at this time. So the AIR questions that I disseminated to the campus were part of a larger residential curriculum survey. So 553 people responded to the survey in general, and 235 of those people responded to the AIR questions specifically. So regarding the demographics of survey respondents, they were primarily Asian, female, and first-year students. So students know, what I found through the survey results was that students know what the AIR program is, but they often don't know what their AIR's name is or how to actually contact them. Most feel neutrally about the AIR's accessibility or neutrally or negatively about the AIR's visibility. Most aren't attending AIR programming, but they're engaging in the passive programming, which are the bulletin boards and the posters. They feel neutrally about the educational value of the program. However, they overwhelmingly believe that the AIR position is important and necessary and should exist, and they view the AIR as good advocates for marginalized students. So some challenges and limitations. There was a lack of updated campus climate survey data. So they had conducted a survey, RISD had conducted a survey in 2011 and then one in 2015, but because of the time gaps, I couldn't really incorporate into my analysis the way I would have liked. And then lastly, there's a lack of personal institutional knowledge on my part. So I started working at RISD last June, but by the time I graduate, it would have been less than a year. Potentially, if I'd been at RISD longer and more immersed in the community, that would have helped me conduct the analysis. So ultimately, with the survey, the interviews, and the benchmarking, I came up with these recommendations. So I think there should be a professional staff role dedicated to the supervision of the heirs exclusively. I think that other student groups and roles should be in place that work in tandem with the heirs to help advance the goals of the program. I think the RLO should consider partnering closely with other offices, such as the ISE, so that's the Center for Intercultural Student Engagement at RISD, to sort of strengthen the capacity of the role. I think there should be a revised heir job description released that makes the expectations more clear. I think they should have a specific residential curriculum and programming model, because the RAs have one and it's called Curate. So it might help sort of guide and direct the programming of the heirs. I think heirs should have a separate training from RAs that is equal in length and quality. And additionally, I think heirs should conduct multiple in-service trainings for RAs throughout the year to make sure that the RAs are being as inclusive as possible in their own roles, and that the RAs are imbuing the ideals of social justice into their programming, and they have the tools to do so. So these are all the people that I interviewed. These are the sources I used for the lit review, and that's it. Thank you.